May you guard your chest. May your voice be loud and your throats truthful. May this image you guard be concealed. May you spread your wings and do your duties, that I may pass by you in peace. Imhotep, and welcome. I'm Mog Morgan, companion of Set, Knight of Shambhala, and this is the Egyptian Magic podcast. So I kind of started with a little prayer from the Amduat, which is the book of what is in the underworld, really, in the 5th hour, and it's a prayer to the god Anubis, who is half wolf and half dog, or all wolf, or jackal, or whatever, various theories about that. And in the 5th hour, the chest is, I guess, the chest full of goodies from the body, maybe the kind of canoptic jars and stuff like that, which Anubis is kind of set to guard. So I want to do a couple of things. This is actually recorded on the new moon and the beginning of a new lunar month, which in our house of life and our ritual year is devoted to the Egyptian god Anubis. So I thought I'd better talk a little bit about Anubis in some detail, really, as it's a very interesting topic and piece of magic to carry out throughout the course of the month. And a couple of coincidences already related to that. If there's time, I've got a kind of new little featurette that I hope to kind of introduce into this, which is an interview with another magician, Steve D, who I spoke to a few weeks ago and asked him about his views about the god Set, or Apophis, if you like, kind of sometimes the two sides of it, and I asked him to reflect on both sides of that. And Set, as I say, from Companions of Set, is something that I'm particularly interested in, so I'm obsessed with it. Like I asked sort of various people what their take is, and he has a very interesting interpretation of that. I should say as well that Set is, there can be a relationship between Set and Anubis, which I'll probably should go into, that sometimes they're seen as the same deity. They look very similar, especially in some representations. Obviously Set has these very distinctive ears, which perhaps they've been mutilated, and there's a part of the mythology of Anubis in which he's punished basically for taking on the form of Set, for allowing Set to disguise himself as Anubis, which is why that happens, is an interesting point in its own right. So Anubis has an ambiguous, very ambiguous quality to him, so much so that he sometimes think of him as kind of a tamed form of Set. And while I'm thinking about that, I should say as well that I mentioned the Companion of Set and also Knight of Shambhala, which is a kind of Hindu, more of a Hindu kind of magical thread within the kind of magic that I do. And I run a forum on Facebook called Mukos Tantra. So Tantra is another kind of more recent name for that kind of thing, and so I run both things alongside. Now, obviously, if you know, there's always an overlap. In my view, there's an overlap between the two systems. They're both kind of the tantric and the Hindu, the Egyptian magic. So that I've been kind of bringing that out more, really. And one of the projects that I'll kind of share with you eventually is this idea of a tantra of the Egyptians, because it's getting kind of so much material now. It's an interesting way to do it. So just as I talk about the ritual year, in my kind of managing of the Mukos group, I also kind of work with ritual year. I think this concept of the ritual year, of a cycle, of a large cycle over the course of at least a year, and the shorter cycle over the course of a month. It is an amazing key to magic, really. Another subject that I'll share with you a future time is to do with, I suppose, alchemy. What they call alchemy, or psychophysical alchemy, is very, very close to the idea of tantra. In fact, I would say one important interpretation of alchemy is as a kind of a tantric art, really. So I was working on that, and it occurred to me that what I was going to say, I was working on this kind of alchemy thing, and in these texts, these sort of from Roman Egypt, they specifically says this guy Zosimus, that the ritual year, or the cycle, the cosmic cycle of planets, of decans, of the ebb and flow of the moon, incredibly important in the alchemy that they practice. In fact, he doesn't think that the alchemy, even when it's in the more physical manifestation in terms of tinting metals, colouring metals, which is one of the kind of things, making gold, really. Even in that, even when it looks like it's just physical manipulation of stuff, the ritual year is very, very important. So all these different threads are coming together, and I'm kind of interpreting them for you over the coming period. Anyway, so today, it's a new moon, which in the ritual calendar of all these different systems is the beginning of a new short ritual cycle of the lunar month. And as I've explained elsewhere many times, each month within the Egyptian system, which we're focusing on, would be sacred to a particular god or goddess. Now, of course, there's lots and lots of different supernatural entities and gods and goddesses and spirits within the Egyptian tradition. But in a sense, and all of those will get a kind of turn, will come into the picture. But usually you've got 12 or sometimes 13 lunar months in the course of the year to work with, and each one of them tends to be dominated by a particular god or goddess. And this month, which is the 7th month of the year since the new year in the Egyptian cycle, is sometimes called the Lesser Fire Festival. That was one name for it. Fire Festival in the sense of they were burning material in the fields, really. They're burning the stubble in order to kind of clear out all the kind of waste and pests from the cycle, ready for the new planting and stuff. That's one name for it, but it's because there's a sort of quality of emptying out and purification, maybe. In some ritual calendars, it was also important for this entity, this god Anubis. I should say as well, strangely enough, in the tantric tradition, even though their month is not connected particularly with Anubis, but the cult of Anubis and the dog people is so important in the ancient world that a major centre of what you would call the dog people, or the dog people, or the kind of mother of dogs and all this sort of stuff, is in India itself. Now, some of this is kind of seems like a tall story. It's kind of the sort of crazy things that are said in Europe about things that happen in the East, on the far reaches of the empire as was, when people don't really know what's going on. But it is a notable phenomena that this mythology to do with dogs, and the experts on the area do think that there's some transference of the cult of the connected with the dog or wolf into India. And the story that I was also looking at this time is that, see, dogs are quite taboo, really, outcast, representatives of outcasts within Indian society. I think in a lot of other societies as well, in the Middle East, there's this sort of very ambiguous relationship between them, and that would be the same for Anubis as well. His original role is quite taboo within Egyptian culture. He is almost like a demon that's been tamed and brought on side, as are a lot of the Egyptian gods and goddesses. They have this kind of quite dark history or interesting history, taboo history, the further you go back. And it seems clear that right at the beginning of the pharaonic culture, or perhaps even before the formation of Egypt as a nation state, what they usually call in their mythology the unification of the north and south, people buried their dead in the desert. They probably practiced something you might call sky burial, basically, judging by these very, very old records. They may even have, they may have just left the corpses to be dismembered by the elements, to return to the elements, and part of the process of that would be being eaten by wild dogs. And if you go to Egypt, there's actually quite a lot of wild dogs, some of them quite dangerous in the desert areas. If you wander out of the cultivated strip for not very far, it can be quite easy to be confronted by semi-wild feral dogs, which are very beautiful, but also quite scary, dangerous canids in the desert area. This all kind of links with the Sethian thing. So you have these representations. One of the earliest representations of the god Anubis is as a kind of tomb, really. You're a tomb inside the dog, in a sense, because you've been eaten by the dog. And I suppose over time people change the meaning of that to make Anubis to give him this connection with death and the transference, the passage over from the world of the living to the world of the dead, the transition. And it was an amazing coincidence when I read this thing called the Paw's Trident, or the Trident Paw, which is a story within the Indian tradition where dogs also have this role of bringing people from one realm to another. And you've got this character who's been abandoned in the wilderness in the Indian tradition, and maybe he's been killed, he's been left for dead by the lawmakers of the time, and a dog comes along meaning to eat the body and scratches him and makes a sign of three scratch marks on his forehead by accident before he eats him, really. And that sign happens to be the sign of the god Shiva. So he marks the corpse with the sign of the god Shiva. So when the what would you call Shiva's messengers arrive to take the corpse away to the underworld, basically, they see this sign. So instead they think, well, he's been marked, hasn't he? He's been marked by Shiva, so they take him to heaven instead, even though he'd probably, in terms of karma and all the rest, he doesn't really deserve to go to heaven, but he's got the mark on him. So he's been kind of initiated and helped to go to the other world by this kind of outcast dog. And that theme in India is quite a kind of potent one, really. There's quite a lot you can say about that. It's not the subject that we're really going to talk about today, but I was very struck by that, and I kind of thought it's time to kind of bring all these threads together and write something about the Tantra of the Egyptians, which I'll share some of that with you at another time. But I just thought I'd say that I've made a start, and Anubis is obviously going to play a role in that. So as you can guess already, Anubis is an incredibly ancient entity, natural entity, a kind of, some say he's a wolf, some say he's a jackal, some say he's a bit of both, a dog, a dark dog. And you see these amazing images of Anubis sitting on a kind of chest. One of the things that that amazing prayer for Anubis to protect the canoptic chest comes from this book, the Amduat, the Great Awakening, and you can see the picture of that I'm talking about, Anubis, the classic image from the tomb of Tutankhamun, of Anubis on top of a chest, and I think in the chest were all sorts of funeral remains that he's particularly tasked with guarding. So the magics, in terms of magic, which is the main interest, not just kind of is operational magic connected with Anubis. It goes back quite a long way. Some of the oldest rituals in Egypt. I know people are very interested in this collection of magical papyri that comes from the kind of Roman era, really, which seems to be miniaturized versions of much older rituals. But there are kind of parallels to those, or precursors to those sort of rituals, and one of those is the great Harris Magical Papyrus, which has a long ritual associated with Anubis. Primarily, I suppose if you're making this transition between the living and the dead, you're moving between the two realms, it would be natural enough that you would be associated with divination, an inquiry of the dead, which was a kind of very common activity within the Egyptian realm, and one that is very common for the magical community, continues with this tradition. And Anubis is very well known. His rituals, some incredibly long rituals. In the book, where I've compiled a lot of literature for this, the Egyptian Magic book, there's a long kind of ritual to Anubis which involves basically a seance, in which Anubis is asked to take on his role of kind of shepherding people into the circle, shepherding the gods and goddesses as required into the ritual space, entertaining them, offering them food and all the other things, and then channeling your questions to the god or gods. So this is a form of divination, and sometimes it's done with a vessel as well, in which you kind of scry into a vessel. All sorts of different methods of this, all based on miniaturized Egyptian temple ritual. That's his name in the hieroglyphic tongue is Inpw, from which you can say Anpu. You can see how you might get the word sort of gradually Anubis from Inpw. And Inpw means, strictly speaking, it kind of means child. Or I've translated it as medium, really. It's talking about to do these rituals with Anubis. Anubis is the kind of archetypal medium. He mediates between the different realms. And also to do the rituals you need a medium. And so his name meaning child, I should say, it was there's an idea in ancient ritual and also even in Islamic magic and stuff like that, I believe, that younger people being less kind of, I don't know, worked over or whatever, being more innocent, they're more open-minded. They're more able to perceive the other world, perhaps because they're younger, they're closer to it because they've kind of come from it sort of more recently. But there's always this idea that that part of the mindset of the medium is to kind of have this almost childlike acceptance of things, or openness to different influences and all the rest. Obviously that can be difficult for them, but with this, so Anubis is sort of takes on that role. That's what it's referring to. Take on this role of the innocent who moves between, who is close to the other world and is sensitive in some ways. Is still sensitive. What I mean is, as we grow up, we become less sensitive. We become less easily afraid of things. Is one way of looking at it. because we just get used to it, and then we just take it for granted, and we forget that we can sense certain things, and we learn to block it out one way or another. So, as I say, in another of these texts, the Papyrus Vandier, it does talk about this thing of the ability of the god Set to take on the role of Anubis as well. So this is a Setian mystery in some ways, but Anubis is, well, both of them then you would say they're shapeshifters. They can change their form from one to another, and that gets Anubis, the son of a wolf, into trouble, because he allows, I don't know, you think, well, why is it his fault if Set chooses to disguise himself as Anubis? But it's the way the system works. If the Anubis gets some of the blame of that, and there's a permanent record within the ritual equipment of the punishment of Anubis for the fact that Set has taken on his form and done some bad things, right? Which to sneak into the embalming room, basically, which is, the embalming room would be very much the domain of Anubis. It's often said that the priests of Anubis who carried out the embalming wore masks to look like Anubis as well, and perhaps a mask to sort of shield themselves from some of the things they're doing. So there's definitely this idea that they could disguise themselves, but also the embalming room is this kind of very sensitive place. It's the heart of magic in lots of ways, and it is very closely connected with what Set does, because he does something to the god Osiris, of course. He sort of makes the need for there to be embalming, because he kind of drowns him, he kind of dismembers him, so that he has to be kind of stitched back together and resurrected in one stage. But in a way, that's a kind of an initiation. So Set is the initiator, and then Anubis is in the same room, kind of fixing the situation. And you can see how there's a kind of one role could very much interchange with the other. Okay, so in the book I give a very long spell from the Greek magical papyri for a difficult and elaborate ritual, which we kind of do it every year. Every time this comes around in the cycle, we have another go at this ritual, and one of us takes on the role of the of Anubis, if you like, as the medium, and channels what they're seeing, and we go through this section of rituals. I should mention another deity who is very, very important and often confused with Anubis, or maybe it is the same entity, which is Wet Wawet, the opener of the ways, who is usually Anubis, not in a funeral context, but in the sense of opening, usually kind of in the sense of a battle or whatever, sort of going onto the field and opening the ways. But there's obviously a relationship there. It's the one who kind of mediates, the one who opens the door. In one way, you see, all of these ideas would fit with the cult connected with the funeral, or the alchemical process that's taking place, because this is also where alchemy is created within the embalming room, and all these different gods interacting with each other. There are many famous images of Anubis that you can sort of locate, and I'll show you a few of those. Okay, so in the ritual, which we'll have another go, it like all of these rituals. I recommend that people do an opening of some sort, and there's a sort of standard Tanchem opening, which I call that, which is based again on material from the uh, the magical papyri, and because it largely uses raw sounds rather than specific words from any particular language, they're just phonemes, they're strings of phonemes. This kind of banishing, oh no, banishing, I shouldn't call it a banishing, is it gets, you get the words that it's an opening. The idea is not necessarily a banishing. A banishing is another thing. The last thing we want to do now is banish things. We want them to come. You know, I suppose the idea of your purification maybe sometimes. Banishing maybe is something you might do at the end of the ritual. But basically the opening uses sounds, and it can work within any tradition because these sounds, these raw phonemes, exist pretty much in all languages, the mysteries of them, and the mystery of sound and these vowel sounds and vowel chanting exists within the tantric tradition as well, which we're kind of using as a counterpoint to the Egyptian material. So the ritual, so you do the opening. The ritual starts with a number of people. There's a priest and there's a medium, and so there's an interchange, a dialectic between the two people in a ritual, which is a common feature of Egyptian rituals. This kind of two people. Sometimes it's male and female. That's quite a common pairing, especially in the later alchemical tradition. But usually it's two people who cooperate together. That's the most productive way. So you have solitary rituals. You have rituals between two people. Rituals sometimes with three people, and then rituals with a larger group of people, which might be more ecstatic, musical dance type things. But we're focusing on this ritual in which other people, there can be an audience in the sense of people who have questions, but at the heart of the ritual are two people, the priest and the medium, the Anubis in a way. And the priest makes an opening address saying, "Hail thou soul god, thy god of the soul, Anubis, the son of Nephthys. Hail, holder of the key, who sends the phantoms of the dead for my service in this hour, this very hour. Hail, Anubis, loyal dog, resting on the box of myrrh, and your feet resting on the frankincense." As a reference to the box or the chest again there. "When I make this libation, Anubis, with your fair face I see you, great God, and with this mask or mark about my head, I am Anubis, master of secrets." So there's a kind of thing about making marks, like, as I say, like in the Indian tradition of the dog making the mark on someone's forehead that marks them out as being one of us, or to be taken to the realm of Shiva or whatever. Again, this idea is a very common one within the Egyptian idea, that you have a certain mark, and there may even be a herb. There's a thing called an Anubis herb. I'm not quite sure. It's an eye drop, essentially. I should say that all these things are related to each other. Because now we're talking about the medical tradition, and Egypt invented this thing called the eye drop, literally an eye dropper, to drop a very small dose of medicine into your eye for various conditions that one might get, especially in that sort of climate. But the Anubis herb is, from the accounts of it, it's probably a mild antiseptic, but it's also the idea of opening the eyes. There's certain ideas what this might be. I think it's in one account it says stachys root, which I don't know too much about that, but I suppose the symbolic idea anyway is that the eye drops open the eyes so that they can see as Anubis sees. And obviously dogs are famous for their heightened senses and all the rest of that. They see everything. So there's this lot. I can't share all of the ritual with you. It's extremely long, but there's this to-ing and fro-ing between the medium and in the form of Anubis and the priest, kind of making various offerings and talking to the spirit to get it into the right place. And sometimes the ritual is spoken, and sometimes the ritual is actually whispered, as in, "Oh, good ox herd, Anubis," because the herder, you see, "open the eyes of the media so they may see. O pure gods of the primal waters, I am a child of earth by name, under the soles of whose feet the gods of Egypt are placed," that's Anubis. "I am the one in the shrine." So there's this kind of counterplay. There's an incredibly interesting ritual between the priest slipping from one state to another, sometimes the priest, sometimes taking on the form of Anubis, and then all the way through this saying in this sort of trance to the medium, "Open your eyes and tell me what you can see." There's a repeated refrain in this ritual. Open your eyes. Again, it's become a medium, very much an Anubis type thing. And this goes on and on until the medium gets, into the right trance state that they can see these things, and sometimes they repeat the stuff, and eventually there's a signal from the medium. They say, be great, oh light," so they can see. And the priest sort of to kind of hurry this along says, "Oh darkness, remove yourself from him and bring the light to me." So then the ritual goes into another phase, right? An extremely long ritual in which, having got into this psychic state, they can then see the other world. They can see the gods and goddesses, and Anubis' role then is to bring them in, those who are required, and to look after them, to shepherd them, which is his role, and to relay any questions that come from the medium, from the priest, or from the other people who are witnessing the ritual, who may have come with material that specific questions they want to ask. So this is all the work of the time we're in, the month of Anubis. There's lots of other interesting things connected with this. When being asked, and having done this myself, I can say that as if you act as medium is quite tiring business. It's not something you would want to go on for more than an hour, which is the recommended time limit for the entire ritual. And that makes sense, because this sort of stuff can be very, very draining. So sooner or later, everything has to be wound up. All the food's been eaten, everything's been drunk, and Anubis has asked the gods to return to their domains, and it just remains for Anubis to be kind of let go and asked to go. And for this, there's a traditional license to depart, which we use in other rituals as well, because it's quite nice, where we say, farewell, Anubis. The good ox herd, you've done well for us. You've kind of done the work. Anubis, the son of a wolf and a dog. Senebti, which means blessings. Cherub of Amenti, which is another name for Anubis. King of those in the underworld. And the whole thing, it will be repeated usually 7 times. And when it's all up finished, it will be, anything left over will be poured into the earth, and the whole thing will be wrapped up, and we'll make a note of all the answers and queries we got. So you see, an incredibly important and popular deity, one with lots of different references and cross fertilization with other traditions and cultures. Also has the added advantage of being a very ambiguous, shape-shifting god, always very interesting magically, with a huge ancient history. So, blessings of Anubis, as I've already given you for the coming month, and look forward to more revelations to do with the our good wolfy friend.